Right, welcome back everyone to Author Story. I am your host, Alexander Lim, and our guest, Thomas W. Jones, is the author of From Willard Straight to Wall Street, a memoir, which you can check out by clicking on the Amazon link in the video description below. Thomas Jones is the founder and senior partner of venture capital investment firm TWJ Capital, LLC, and has previously served as Chief Executive Officer of Global Investment Management at Citigroup. He has also received master's degrees from Cornell University and Boston University and holds honorary doctoral degrees from Howard University and the College of New Rochelle. So, Tom, welcome to Author Story. Thank you very much for being with us.
Good morning, Alvin. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, Tom, first off, a bit about yourself, like where it all began in childhood. What was your childhood like for you? Considering that I believe you grew up in a very turbulent time, like in the 60s, where all these social unrests going on. What was it like growing up?
I had a pretty unusual childhood in that my dad, born in 1909 in Charlotte, North Carolina, at a time when, for a black man, the most available career opportunities were in the ministry, which is what my dad did initially. But he always had a thirst for science, and he ultimately received a master's in physics from Indiana University. And then, as America began to open up a little bit in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, my dad got significant jobs in the defense industry and was, in fact, senior engineer on the Atlas missile guidance project in the 1950s. So I had an experience which was both a family that had experienced the harshness of racial segregation and discrimination in the American South, but also a family that overcame those obstacles and hardships to lift themselves up through education.
Right. Okay. So I guess then it'd be kind of like I don't want to say foregone conclusion, but it'd be like sort of like a thing that you would eventually go to college then.
Oh, absolutely, no question. My dad was focused on, the key to life, the key to success was commitment to God, education, and hard work. And that's how you lived. And so it was just assumed that I would go to college.
Nice, nice. And those are pretty good. Those are pretty good standards to lift up to on a personal level. I believe. Hard work definitely can't get anywhere without doing some hard work. You got to get and then commitment to God. Come on.
Well, morality is personal morality and moral discipline is a critical aspect of, elevating one's life to
Yeah.
something that you can be proud of.
Right. Okay. So let's get on with your college years. This was in the 60s, and from what I understand of my history, busing was still being resisted in some areas of the United States up until that time. So, and you did mention that there was like racial segregation even before that. So, how big was it of a feat for you to get into college as an African American?
Well, when I was admitted to Cornell University in September 1965,
Hmm.
there were 35 African Americans in my freshman class.
Hmm.
On the entire Cornell University campus at that time, meaning all undergraduate students plus the graduate school, numbering about 12,000 students, there
Hmm.
were only 23 African Americans in all of those classes prior to us. So I was in
Right.
that first wave of a more significant number of African Americans admitted to Cornell University in the mid 1960s.
Right. Okay. And I'd like to speak a little bit on something as well, because this was a time of social upheaval, racial integration. What was the environment like, outside college in the general environment?
Well, to put it in perspective, uh, in a 5-year span there in the mid 1960s, early to mid 1960s,
Right.
President John Kennedy was assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. We were in this endless, what seemed like an endless war in Vietnam, where hundreds of black soldiers were dying every month, and riots were raging in cities across America, literally every summer. There were actually machine guns stationed at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. in one of those riots. So I think at that time, America was on the verge, the very cusp of a bloody uprising by the African American population.
And I guess that kind of feeds into the thing that really kicks off the whole book, the Straight Takeover, where you and your friends occupied Straight Hall for something like 2 days. What were the circumstances behind this occupation? How did this come about?
I began to, when I got to Cornell and began to associate with black students whose life experience was dramatically different from the experiences that my family had in America, I came to understand the kind of racial oppression that had been imposed upon African Americans over a 350-year period. And frankly, I thought the wheel of history had turned, and my generation had to be the African American generation that was tasked with the obligation and destiny to finally draw the line and say we were going to fight and end our oppression in America. So even though I had not been a victim of severe racial discrimination in any way. And I personally was very accepted on the Cornell University campus. In fact, I was the freshman class president in my very first year there at Cornell.
All right.
But I connected to the broader experience of blacks in America and felt that we, my cohort, my generation, had a historical destiny to change our conditions in America. That is, we were going to fight and raise the price of oppression, or alternatively, America had to change and begin to actually implement and live up to the kind of ideals that are expressed in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Okay. And so I believe the occupation itself, the trigger for this was you were asking for Black Studies class in the university's curriculum. Now, I gathered from what you told me that you didn't mention why this might be so important. But why go to the extent of actually occupying a college hall for 2 days?
Well, we had been fighting for a Black history curriculum, Black studies curriculum, because it was necessary to understand the story, the economics of what had been done to African Americans, the economics of slavery, how vast amounts of capital were generated through the production of cotton, through the production of sugar, through the production of tobacco, based upon the cheap slave labor, how that capital accumulation drove America's economic growth.
Right.
We needed that to be part of the Cornell curriculum. We needed to understand the sociology of what had been done to Black American families through the separation and brutality of slavery, where families were just ripped apart. We needed those truths to be part of the Cornell University curriculum. And, the university had resisted, but and in that process, a number of Black students had been sanctioned by the judicial system at the university. And so the takeover at Cornell, at the Willard Straight Hall, was actually in response to those sanctions against the students who had led protest for the Black Studies program. It's important to understand we did not have guns when we took over Willard Straight Hall.
Okay.
What happened was that a white fraternity, Delta Upsilon fraternity,
Mm-hmm.
about 30 guys from Delta Upsilon
Mm-hmm.
broke into a side window
Mm-hmm.
at the student union building that we were occupying,
Mm-hmm.
and they came in because they didn't think we had a right to be there,
Mm-hmm.
and presumably they thought they were going to throw us out.
Mm-hmm.
Now, put this in historical context, because this is how I reacted.
Right.
This was the equivalent of, you go back to Reconstruction after the Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
this was like white vigilantes
Mm-hmm.
coming in, as they did in Reconstruction in the 1870s,
Mm-hmm.
using vigilante action to put down the black population that had just been freed from slavery at the end of the Civil War. So it was white vigilantism in the 1870s that had suppressed the black population, the newly freed slaves.
Mm-hmm.
And so we reacted, these white fraternity guys coming in, as though they were going to throw us out of the building.
Mm-hmm.
This to us was another form of vigilantism.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't the university authorities. These are just guys who decide they're going to take it into their own hands and throw us out of the building.
Mm-hmm.
So we fought them,
Mm-hmm.
threw them out, and then, because of the rumors that were going on, we decided we had to arm ourselves to defend ourselves. And that's when we brought the guns into the building.
Right. Okay. And fortunately, it didn't last long. Like it's just a couple of days, I imagine. How did this end? I mean, how did this? How did the takeover end?
Well, the university administration fortunately realized that this could quickly spin out of control with very unpredictable consequences.
Right.
So they moved very quickly to try to negotiate an end, which was done pretty quickly. And we had a resolution, an accommodation that essentially accomplished the objectives that the black students had been seeking, and we left the building.
Okay. All right. Well, thankfully, it didn't end violently. I mean, good grief. Good grief.
Yeah, those situations are pretty unpredictable
Yeah.
because, there were rumors were that there were 300 or 400 state and local police, National Guard assembled in downtown Ithaca.
Mm-hmm.
And there were those, of course, who were agitating for a forceful response, to remove us from the building. Frankly, just as the fraternity guys had gained access to the building on their own initiative, you could have had other vigilantes that decided to try to take action against us, and it could have easily turned into gunshots.
Right.
And then there easily could have been loss of life in that situation.
Yeah.
We were fortunate that it ended the way it did.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Definitely. It's a fortunate thing that it worked out. All right.
But
Go
to
ahead.
me, I want to make one point there.
Go ahead.
The symbolism that I think is important is, here are black students at an Ivy League university putting their lives on the line, saying we will no longer be intimidated by vigilantes, and we are prepared to fight. If necessary, we are prepared to fight with weapons if necessary to support the principle of educational opportunity and educational truth about American history, that we will no longer just be subjugated and oppressed in the way that our ancestors had been. And I think that's the important symbolism of what happened at Willard Straight Hall.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. It's powerful symbolism right there. I mean, it's not like you guys were just rebelling willy-nilly. I mean, there was a point. There was a reason behind all that.
Very important historical reason.
Yes, very important. Okay, so moving on, you graduate from college and then you go into the corporate world. Now, I have a couple of questions here because I know that like affirmative action was big in like the 70s and the 80s. What's your take on that, especially like as you were progressing in the up the corporate ladder?
Well, I had always recognized that American history abounds with contradictions.
Hmm.
And so, even though I've been talking about the racial oppression and discrimination
Hmm.
in American history, it's also true that American history abounds with many white Americans of conscience and goodwill who have fought alongside blacks at every step of the way to overcome America's racial history
Hmm.
and create a better country. And so my perception was that in the late 1960s, America was at a fork in the road.
Hmm.
It could have turned the right hand fork, so to speak, would have been racial oppression,
Hmm.
a heavy police response and subjugation of the black community,
Hmm.
or the left fork in the road would have been, let's try to open this society up
All right.
and try to live up to our ideals and, equality and freedom and true democracy, voting rights, and so on. And my perception was America took that left fork in the road
Hmm.
and was trying to create a more open and egalitarian society closer to approximating America's ideals. And, I wanted to participate in that.
Hmm.
My life, my roots were faith and optimism.
All right.
You know, my parents' story was, they raised themselves, their lives through faith and hard work, education, and I wanted to follow that path.
Hmm.
If America was going to be a more open society, I wanted to try to take advantage of those opportunities.
Hmm.
At the same time, I absolutely believed that the toughest obstacles would be in the business world
Hmm.
because the the most difficult fight would be where the greatest amount of wealth was at stake.
Right.
And
Right.
so I thought the barriers would be greatest in the business world.
Hmm.
And so that's why I wanted to pursue a business career. I wanted to be part of the toughest fight.
Hmm. Okay. And I mean, you did succeed. I mean, you became the CEO of Citigroup's Global Investment Management, and I mean, when I think about it, I mean, there aren't that many black and African American men in such positions even today.
Well, I discovered something
Hmm.
early in the 70s. When I embarked, I figured I did not have much of a chance of success at all,
Mm.
okay?
Okay.
I,
Okay.
not only was there the broader racial discrimination, but here I was, I carried the label of that's that radical from Cornell. That's that
Right.
black,
Right.
the guns at Cornell guy.
Right. Right.
So I figured the odds of success for me were pretty low.
Hmm.
So I adopted this mentality of, Tom, you can't allow yourself to be judged. You can't let your view of yourself be shaped only by what the people around you say. You're going to be in a negative, you have to assume you're going to be in a hostile environment. So you have to focus on what you can control.
Hmm.
And what you can control is your attitude.
Hmm.
You can control how hard you work, and you can control your commitment to excelling in whatever you do.
Hmm.
That's all you can do. Okay, that's all that you can control. You can do these things and not succeed,
Hmm.
but you will know in your heart if you're able, to control your attitude, your approach to the work, your commitment to excellence, you will know in your heart that you have done everything you could possibly do. And that's all that any person can do. And what I discovered, as I approach things with that mentality
Hmm.
and was putting 100% effort into trying to excel at whatever I was doing every day, I discovered that, I had always kind of functioned at a 90 or 95% level of effort, because that's what we're socialized to do in school. I mean, 90, 95 is an A.
All right.
And
All right.
I mean, if you get an A, what else can you be expected to do, right?
Right. Right.
But I discovered that there's actually, when you commit yourself to a 100% level of effort
Mm-hmm.
to achieve your best, there's actually a big gap between 100 and 95. It doesn't seem like much on any given exam.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem like much on any given work assignment, okay?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But there actually is a difference, and it's significant. It doesn't seem like much on any given day,
Mm-hmm.
but that 5 point gap of effort and commitment to excellence, if you can keep repeating it every day after day, week after week, month after month, it actually is a tremendous gap of effort and likely achievement. And I began to get picked up.
Mm-hmm.
People that were senior executives began to notice me.
Mm-hmm.
And, senior executives in corporations, the most successful ones are like coaches on sports teams,
Mm-hmm.
where they're just trying to pick up athletes, so to speak,
All right. All right.
because the senior executive that has the best team is the guy that's usually going to win.
Right.
And
Right.
so senior guys began to pick me up and bring me on to their team.
Mm-hmm.
They began to be attracted to me, and they would pick me up and bring me on their team. And so I began to develop relationships, which then became the source of my success. These were the people who gave me promotions,
Mm-hmm.
and they gave me protection,
Mm-hmm.
and they gave me opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a reciprocal relationship. I performed really well for them, so
Mm-hmm.
they looked good,
Mm-hmm.
and then they took care of me. And that was the pattern that lifted me throughout my career. That went on for, 40 years.
And I'd just like to point this out because I'm sure some of our listeners out there are thinking, "Oh, okay, Thomas, he went up because there's affirmative action and he's an African American, or because he sucked up to the bosses." But this really isn't the case, is it? I mean, you drove your career, you drove yourself to doing what needed to be done, and you were rewarded for it.
It's exactly right.
Mm.
All that affirmative action does for the most part usually is get you in the door.
Mm-hmm.
It is rare in corporate America for affirmative action to determine the winner, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
at in those positions, those high level positions that everybody is striving for.
Right.
It is rare for affirmative action to be the determinant of those outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And what I managed to do was, most of the time, especially in the 70s and 80s, the people who I was competing with, my white peers who had the classic kind of background and so on, families that had been in business, gone to the best business schools.
Right.
For the most part, these people, they didn't see me as their primary competition.
Mm-hmm.
They saw people like themselves
Mm-hmm.
as, so, you know, to a substantial extent, I was underestimated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a real advantage. If people are underestimating you, and then you really outperform,
Right.
okay,
Right. 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 Right.
it's noticed. It's
Yeah.
noticed.
Yeah.
And so I attracted a lot of attention. And it very much, it worked to my advantage. Only because it was sustained, though, over a, very substantial period of time.
Right. Okay. And I mean, as you went up the corporate ladder, I'm sure you learned quite a few lessons along the way. Would you mind sharing with us maybe one or two of the lessons that you think are most appropriate to achieving this kind of success that you did?
Well, the first one is this message about 100%. That is, you have to have the commitment to achieve to your highest potential, meaning that no individual um, really knows what their full potential is until you put in the effort to really give your very, very best commitment and effort to being all that you can be.
Right.
And that means when you put 100% in, you come away with what I call self-actualization. Self-actualization means that you've achieved your highest potential. And you don't achieve your highest potential until you give 100% effort to doing that,
Right.
and on a sustained basis. So that's first lesson, okay? Learn
Okay.
how to give 100% commitment to whatever the tasks are that you're working on, the important objectives that are in front of you. Give yourself, the benefit of a 100% commitment to being the best you can be, because that's the only way you'll learn what your full potential is.
Right. Right.
Second point I would make, starting in the early 1980s, I adopted a practice of 3 important objectives. Beginning of every year, January 1, I would put in my personal diary 3 important objectives for that year. And these would be kind of overarching goals. So sometimes it would be something like a technical skill. Sometimes it would be something like a physical health objective. And other times it would be something like a spiritual health objective.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so as an example, in 1982, one of my 3 objectives was to read the Bible cover to cover.
Okay. Right. That's a pretty big objective right there.
It's a big objective,
Yeah,
exactly. And so these 3 objectives every year are not small stuff. They are significant things that impact your life, okay?
Right. Right.
I picked the Holy Bible because I'm saying to myself, arguably the Bible is the most important book written in the history of the world. Wouldn't it be foolish to go through life, and you don't know when your life is going to end, okay?
Right. Right.
Wouldn't it be foolish to be, at the end of your life and not having read what's arguably the most important book ever written in the history of the world? And so I said to myself, you need to get this read so that you understand for yourself, what it says and how to interpret that and what it means for your life.
Right. Right.
And so that was one of the things I did that year in 1982. Well, my point is that achieving 3 significant objectives every year, what I call growth objectives, which is either growth in your physical health or growth in your spiritual health or growth in your technical capabilities, okay?
Okay.
If you can do 3 significant things every year, 3 significant goals every year, and repeat that every year, that is powerful. That is a powerful growth discipline and a powerful self-improvement discipline. And I would recommend that. People who can bring that kind of discipline and growth into their lives are very, very likely to be pretty satisfied with, the arc that their life takes.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, those are, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's, if you expand yourself in that way throughout the year, I mean, that makes you more powerful, more expanded for future challenges.
Exactly. You're growing every year, and then you're repeating that year after year after year. And it's just very powerful.
Right. Okay. Okay. So Tom, I just like to go on a little bit of a sidebar a little bit because this is something I've personally been always curious about. You were around when Citigroup CEO Sandy Wheel resigned, and I know that the stock price of Citigroup dropped after he did so. It's quite rare actually for me to speak to someone who's that close, to that sort of position. So can you just heck, our listeners as well, a bit of an insight into why the stock price of company would drop the way it does when such a thing happens?
Well, this actually comprises a couple of chapters in the book, and
Okay.
essentially, what happened was that Sandy resigned
Mm-hmm.
uh, in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
He named his general counsel, the Citigroup general counsel, Charles Prince,
Mm-hmm.
to be his successor.
Mm-hmm.
All of the senior management team, the people like myself that were running major businesses at Citigroup,
Mm-hmm.
we were surprised by
Okay.
Sandy naming Chuck Prince as his successor.
Right.
We all thought that Sandy's successor would be a fellow named Bob Willemstad, who was the president of Citigroup
Mm-hmm.
and was very highly regarded by the other business heads,
Mm-hmm.
or one of the people like myself. So there were 7 or 8 people like myself who ran the major businesses
Mm-hmm.
at Citigroup.
Right.
Instead, Sandy chose the general counsel, Charles Prince.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things that happens, and Sandy went out of his way, he and Charles Prince really tried to persuade all of the senior business leaders
Mm-hmm.
that everything was going to be run as a team,
Mm-hmm.
that Charles Prince would be working closely with Bob Willemstad, who was the president, and most of the business heads like myself
Mm-hmm.
would report to Bob Willemstad
Mm-hmm.
instead of Charles Prince. Okay.
Okay.
Well, within basically 2 years, um, just about all of the senior business leaders like myself
Mm-hmm.
were out of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Chuck Prince fired me in late 2004,
Okay.
and all of the other senior business heads were gone by basically the end of 2005, early 2006.
Right.
And what happened here was that, when you put what I would call an insecure person
Mm-hmm.
into a senior leadership position,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes what happens is that their own insecurity leads them to begin to change the people that are around them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can end up with people who basically tell the leader what the leader wants to hear,
Mm-hmm.
instead of running the businesses based upon the facts and the evidence and the numbers and so on.
Right.
And so essentially, the people who were running the the in the investment banking side of Citigroup, who were running these mortgage origination and securitization businesses, failed to operate with the fundamental disciplines necessary with regards to understanding the factual quality
Mm-hmm.
of the mortgages that you were purchasing,
Mm-hmm.
what their credit characteristics were.
Right.
Secondly, understanding precisely what the quantity of those purchases were at any point in time
Mm-hmm.
that were in what we would call a pipeline.
Right.
You're purchasing securities to reassemble them into a mortgage-backed security that'll
Right.
be sold out into the marketplace. So you need to know at any given point in time how much of this stuff you have on your balance sheet,
Mm-hmm.
and have ways to understand its dimensions relative to the amount of capital that the company has.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have what are called portfolio hedging strategies
Mm-hmm.
to control the risk associated with that portfolio, that pipeline, while it's being assembled and before it was sold.
Right.
And essentially, the replacement management team that Chuck Prince brought into the company
Mm-hmm.
failed to operate. They didn't tell Chuck, I believe they didn't tell Chuck the truth of what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And, when Chuck Prince had that famous quote, you got to keep dancing as long as the music's playing.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, basically in 2008, when the music stopped playing in that mortgage security market,
Mm-hmm.
Citigroup was caught with far more mortgages on its balance sheet in its pipeline, so to speak,
Right.
than the company realized and Prince realized,
Mm-hmm.
and far weaker hedging positions
Mm-hmm.
against that pipeline of securities.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, the company's capital was wiped out.
Mm-hmm.
So, to put this in perspective, when Prince fired me at the end of 2004,
Mm-hmm.
and then I sold all of my Citigroup stock in
Mm-hmm.
early 2005
Mm-hmm.
because I did not think Prince would be successful.
Mm-hmm.
I got out at $48 a share. Okay,
Mm-hmm. Right.
3 years later, um, in the fall of 2008, when
Mm-hmm.
Citigroup collapsed,
Mm-hmm.
the stock was
Well,
$3.77 a share on the day that Prince resigned
wow,
as CEO.
wow, that's a big
And
drop. It's like 90% drop.
that's
That's
90,
that's
that's
huge.
90%. And that
Wow.
happened, during one person's, and it was basically just people he brought in to be the senior executives
Right.
and the lack of discipline and controls with which they operated.
Mm,
And it's a story of weak leadership. And
right.
the Sandy Wiles management team was essentially pushed out of the company
Mm-hmm.
um, because Prince, you know, quite rightly, did not think that these senior business heads respected him and wanted him to be the CEO, and he pushed them out.
Oh, okay. Right. So okay. So that's interesting. Like I mentioned, it's rare for for me to speak to someone who has an inside track on something that something that at that level. Yeah. So thanks for that. Okay, so Tom, we have to wrap this up, and so before we go, I just like to ask you this question since you have admitted you are a man of faith. When when you finally go up to meet God, what would you like him to tell you? What would you like him to say to you?
I'd like him to say, Thomas, you have fought the good fight, you have kept the faith, and you have finished the race.
Mhm. Right, right, and definitely, I mean, given the circumstances, that's that's definitely something that he would probably say to you. Yeah.
And and to me, that's all you can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Right. True. True. I mean, we can
And,
only work on what we can control.
yeah, yeah, and every person can control those things. That
Right.
you did your best, you kept the faith, and you finished. You went as far as you could. You know.
Yeah. True. True. Very true. Very true. Okay, then. So, in closing, the book is From Willard Straight to Wall Street, a memoir. The authors are guest Thomas Jones, and you can find his book on Amazon. So, Tom, thank you very much for being an author story. It was very inspiring and very informative, I must say.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Okay, you're welcome. So, everyone, check out From Willard Straight to Wall Street, and also feel free to explore our channel and check out not only all the great authors and books which are presently on and will be on, but go ahead and subscribe if you want. So catch you all next time on Author Story with another fantastic author and their book.